Today we're answering the question, is belief in God rational? There are some people who think that the answer to this question is obvious, that belief in God comes from social upbringing or emotional comfort or just not thinking about all the evidence carefully, but that's a really strong assumption to make, especially when you consider that most people throughout human history have believed in some form of God, and even today the majority of people globally do. This includes plenty of past and present well-respected thinkers in philosophy and history and science. And even Sir Isaac Newton, for example, was a devout theist, and he once wrote that he who thinks half-heartedly will not believe in God, but he who really thinks has to believe in God. And of course, the number of people who believe in something does not determine whether or not that thing is true, but I think it does suggest that this question may be a little bit more intellectually serious than it's sometimes portrayed, and at the very least, it's worth exploring. I also want to say that I think it is fair to say that not everyone has carefully examined their beliefs, and that can be true of both theists and atheists. But that's really different from saying that belief in God cannot be thoughtful or rational. So today we are exploring the questions, are most people throughout human history wrong and irrational? Or is belief in God ever something that you can do while still thinking critically? So let's get into it. So let's start by defining the word rational. In philosophy, rational belief does not require absolute certainty. Rather, a belief is generally considered rational if a person has good reasons to believe it. And those reasons might come from evidence or arguments or experience or just, other reliable sources of knowledge. And this isn't just true of belief in God. Many of the beliefs that we rely on every single day cannot be proven with complete certainty. A few examples are, we believe that the external world exists. We believe that our senses usually give us reliable information and that other people have minds and experiences like we do. We can't actually prove any of those beliefs with mathematical certainty, but we do rely on them every time we think, every time we reason, every time we make decisions. And because of this, philosophers usually treat rational belief as something that's more modest than proof. A belief can be rational if it fits the evidence that we have, if it helps explain our experience of the world, and if there are good reasons for accepting it. Going a little bit deeper, most philosophers agree that some beliefs can be rational even without being proven through arguments. The reason for this is that if every single belief required proof from another belief, you'd have to justify that belief first and then justify the belief behind that one, and so on forever and ever and ever. And philosophers call this infinite regress. So at some point, reasoning has to begin with some beliefs that are not themselves proven through prior arguments. Philosophers talk about basic beliefs that serve as starting points for our reasoning rather than conclusions reached through a chain of arguments. So some examples, like a couple I mentioned earlier, is that most people believe the external world exists and that our senses usually give us reliable information. Others are that our memories generally reflect real events or that the laws of logic are valid. And these beliefs are typically not proven before we accept them. Instead, they function as reasonable starting points for talking about the world. And there are some philosophers who have suggested that belief in God may work in a similar way. The philosopher Alvin Plantinga, for example, he wrote that if you have evidence for every proposition you believe, and proposition just means a statement or assertion that expresses a judgment, he says, then you will believe infinitely many propositions. So presumably, some propositions can properly be believed and accepted without evidence. Well, why not belief in God? Why is it not entirely acceptable, desirable, right, proper, and rational to accept belief in God without any argument or evidence? In other words, a person may reasonably believe in God through things like reflection on the world or human experience or their sense that some things are truly right or truly wrong, or the sense that love and beauty have real meaning beyond physical explanations. That belief in God is no less rational than our other beliefs about reality, those basic beliefs. All that said, many philosophers, theologians, historians, and scientists have also argued that belief in God is supported not only by those basic beliefs, but by many specific lines of evidence and reasoning, things that have been studied and debated for centuries. So this includes things like scientific arguments, like the cosmological argument, or historical evidence, like the resurrection of Jesus, or as I just mentioned, moral evidence, like the sense that some actions are objectively right or wrong, not just personal preference. And then personal experience as well that people interpret as encounters with God, things like visions or answered prayers or conviction of wrongdoing and so on. So none of these arguments claim to produce absolute proof in a way that a mathematical theorem does. Instead, they attempt to show that belief in God can provide a reasonable explanation for certain features of reality, similar to how different kinds of evidences in, a court case might help a jury determine what most likely happened, or if a historical event really did or didn't happen. And if you're curious, we cover a lot of these different lines of evidence in the other videos on this channel. So if rational belief doesn't require absolute proof, if it doesn't require mathematical certainty, then our question is, how do we decide when one belief is more rational than another? And in many fields, like in science or in history, the answer is just to compare the different explanations and then ask which one best accounts for the available evidence, the available data. And for many people, belief in God is really as simple as that. It's based on the available evidence that they've seen, whether that's basic beliefs or scientific findings about the universe or historical records or other lines of reasoning, that existence of God appears to be the most reasonable, the most rational explanation. And it's not a way to avoid evidence, but rather a belief that is reached after considering the evidence. The mathematician and bioethicist John Lennox, he wrote that faith is not a leap in the dark, it's the exact opposite. It's a commitment based on evidence. And then he added, it's irrational to reduce all faith to blind faith, then subject it to ridicule. That provides a very anti-intellectual and convenient way of avoiding intelligent discussion. So a quick recap, a rational belief does not require absolute certainty. It simply means having good reasons for thinking something is true, and that belief in God can be understood in the same way as many of our other basic beliefs, but it can also be supported by different lines of evidence. And within this framework, belief in God, yes, can reasonably be considered rational. Phew. One final thought is that thoughtful people can look at the same evidence and reach different conclusions. That's okay. It does not mean that one side is being irrational. My encouragement is just to approach these differences in belief with curiosity instead of dismissal. Ask the person why they believe what they believe, how they reach that conclusion, and just remember that our responsibility is not to make other people believe what we believe, but to understand our own reasons and remain open to learning and even revising our beliefs as we continue to examine the available evidence and seek truth. And if you're a Christian, then Scripture also calls you to approach these conversations with humility and love towards the people you disagree with. So, in the comments, I'm curious, do you think belief in God can be rational? Why or why not? And then which argument for or against God do you think deserves the most serious consideration? Of course, if you have questions about this topic or other topics related to Christianity, you can add those to the comments too, and I will do my best to respond there or in a future video. And if you would like to see more content like this, you can click the subscribe button just below the video, and I'll see you next week. Thank you so much.